What's up? Angela Mosley here with Modern Fit Moms. Welcome back to my channel. In today's video, I'm going to talk to you all about Kegels in the sense of why I personally didn't do Kegels to heal my prolapse and eliminate my leaks, and why I don't generally give out Kegels to my clients. I'm going to talk to you about why Kegels might actually be making your symptoms worse instead of better. Then I'm going to share with you my methodology and exercises that you can do to swap your Kegels with exercise-based movement to help restore function in the pelvic floor and get the pelvic floor stronger and more functional. Now, please note, I am not a physical therapist. I am a personal trainer. I've lived through prolapse and excessive leaking down past my knees. I've had 4 vaginal births. However, I have studied and I've trained thousands of women on healing prolapse, diastasis recti, and pelvic floor dysfunction. If you are currently working with a pelvic floor PT and they have prescribed Kegels for you, please listen to your pelvic floor PT. They may have prescribed you Kegels for one reason or another. If you're not okay with that, don't be afraid to ask questions and advocate for yourself. This video is simply education to build more awareness and give you different tools if Kegels are not currently working with you. So without further ado, let's go ahead and dive into education on why Kegels might actually be making your pelvic floor symptoms worse. Okay, so let's talk about why Kegels might be making your symptoms worse. So for starters, many women aren't taught how to do a proper Kegel, right? So you go to the hospital, you give birth, and then they say, okay, now, start doing your Kegels, but they don't actually walk you through actually how to do the Kegel. And so the Kegel is a lift and a squeeze, or a squeeze and a lift. So you want to think squeeze and then lift up. But many women will squeeze and lift up in the posterior pelvic floor, and they forget all about the front because they don't understand that connection from the front or the back passage to the front passage. And so what I like to tell you is just understanding what the front activation feels like versus the back activation. So real quick, back activation is going to be simply thinking about being somewhere in a public space and you feel like you have gas coming on. You want to contract to hold the gas in, right? So that would be the back of the pelvic floor. That would be contracting the back of the pelvic floor. And then the other part is where you feel like you have to go pee and you hold your pee in. That would be the front of the pelvic floor. And so you can contract the front versus the back and right versus left, depending on the position of your pelvis, but also depending on where you visualize that sensation or that activation coming from. But what I find most, or what I hear most, is that women have more posterior pelvic floor tightness and front pelvic floor weakness. And the reason is that most women are contracting the back of the pelvic floor. They're holding, they're clenching, and they're tucking, and that's creating that tension, that compression in the back. And when you have compression in the back, it creates this opening in the front, right? So I know I've talked about it before, but you've got the compression in the back. That's automatically going to push pressure towards the front and pressure towards your bladder. And so the pressure has to go somewhere, right? And so it's going to go towards the weakest link, meaning your bladder, the front of your pelvic floor. And this is why doing more Kegels can actually be bad for your pelvic floor or increase your symptoms, because if you don't know how to contract the front of the pelvic floor and you're just contracting the back, that's going to continue to open up the front of the pelvic floor and create more tension in the back. Again, this is why I don't prescribe Kegels, right? But if your pelvic floor PT gave you Kegels, then and they taught you exactly how to do a Kegel, they've tested you and you're doing them well, then continue with that. However, my methodology is we like to look at the pelvis, the rib cage, and everything that surrounds the pelvic floor, all of the muscles, to help take the slack off the pelvic floor. And just by getting these muscles, other muscles stronger, like the glute max, the glute med, the glute mid, the adductors, your transverse abdominals, your lower abdominals, all of these things play a role, diaphragm of course as well, into the strength of your pelvic floor. And we can simply work on getting these muscles stronger to get the pelvic floor to get stronger as well without doing isolated Kegels. All right, so another thing I want to show you is on the pelvis. So where our pelvis sits matters in pelvic floor activation, all right? So you're pregnant and you've just had your baby, and typically from pregnancy, your pelvis tends to go into more of a external rotated position, right? So have you ever seen, or you're like waddling, right? And your feet are out and you got that duck walk, right? So it's because your pelvis is rotated externally. And what happens, if you can see the string here, that when we externally rotate, I'm going to lose my femur here. When you externally rotate, pretend like this is your pelvic floor. So the string is your pelvic floor muscles. So when you externally rotate, what happens? The pelvic floor drops. it descends down. It provides length. Whereas if you go internal, so yeah, I like to call them the elephant ears, the iliacus or the iliac crest. When you internally rotate, what does that do? It pulls taut on the pelvic floor. So it ascends up or it lifts up. And so that's why when you hear people say internal rotation, because that naturally lifts the pelvic floor. And so instead of doing Kegels all day long, instead if we just swapped our Kegels for more functional movement patterns that promoted more internal rotation, helped to get the glutes on board in a functional way without clenching and tucking them down, this can help lift that pelvic floor naturally with our breath and with our movement that can be more efficient and more effective in the long term than isolated Kegels. So I'm going to go ahead and show you several different exercises that are going to help promote glute strength, adductor strength, and promote internal rotation to help pull that pelvic floor up so that you can start to feel better function within your body. Of course, the number one thing that you want to work on as part of any plan is diaphragmatic breathing. I'm not going to cover that in today's video because I'm simply just showing you a couple different exercises. What you're going to need is a yoga block, a Pilates ball, and something to glide on. So I'm going to use a kitchen towel and a hard surface to glide on. If you don't have a hard surface, you can use a paper plate on a carpet. Just be very mindful of your knees and that there is cushion. Okay, so you've got your items. I've got a Pilates ball, I've got a yoga block, and I have my hand towel. So like I said, the muscles that help directly impact the pelvic floor and activate the pelvic floor are going to be your adductors. Your glutes are going to help turn or take the load off the pelvic floor, because sometimes the back of the pelvic floor is gripping and holding on, and because the glutes are weak, so we need to get those glutes to turn back on. And then of course our lower abdominals play a role in the front pelvic floor activation. So we want to think more function and reducing tension and creating that whole body movement pattern. Okay, so the very first exercise is a super basic supine exercise to turn on those lower abs. You probably have experienced it yourself with dead bugs. So I'm going to go over the dead bug variations, and you can choose one that helps you. Now, the further or the more advanced you get, of course, the more activation you're naturally going to get from that pelvic floor, because our lower abs and our pelvic floor respond together. And when we drive our legs all the way out, this actually produces higher activation than a Kegel itself. And so this is why I always program dead bugs, whether it's newly postpartum, or it's more advanced, intermediate, or even today for my monthly members that are past the point of rehab. They no longer have symptoms and they're just maintaining good, healthy, strong muscles, is because we need to continue to work them. So I absolutely love dead bugs and a lot of different variations, but I'm going to show you the very basics today. So go ahead, join me down onto the mat. We're going to come into a supine position. And so we really do want to think about our breath here, because our breath is very important, especially when it comes to the activation of the pelvic floor. But we also want to think about our ribs and our pelvis. All right. So if you're stuck in this position where your ribs are shifted up, maybe you have compression back here that's shoving your ribs up. So then this, I don't want to say it detaches from the pelvis, because it's not attached to the pelvis per se, but this is going to disrupt your pelvis and your pelvic floor activation. So you want to make sure that you have a nice stack. So if you need to, you can physically rotate your pelvis under to help support that movement. That doesn't mean that we're clenching and tucking under. We're just repositioning our body to make it more supportive. Okay. So the very first option is you want to think about pulling your hip bones towards one another, because that's going to activate those lower abdominals. Like I said, your lower abdominals are directly attached, not attached, but they connect with your front of the pelvic floor. And so when we get our lower abs on board, we can then get our pelvic floor on board. Okay. So ribs are down. And you want to think inhale here, and then exhale, drive that knee up, and then drop down. So what we're doing here is we're using our deep core muscles and our lower abdominals to keep our pelvis still, right? We're stabilizing the pelvis. So we shouldn't see this rocking of the hip as we drive up. That's a bit excessive, but I hope you know what I mean. So my hip's not rocking and moving when I drive that knee up. So that's the very first. And I know it's mundane, guys, but we need to lay this foundation to make sure that you have good, solid activation. So you want to drive up and drop down, and then same thing, drive up and then drop down. Okay. So once you feel like you've mastered that, then you can come into knees above the hips, and then same thing, drop down and drop down. Okay. So again, once you've mastered that, no pooching in the belly, ribs are down, your lower abs are on, and you don't have any hip popping, right? Your pelvis isn't shifting up. I don't want to say your back's not jamming into the floor, but your back's not lifting up off the floor, because then that would indicate that your lower abs are not on. Okay. So once you feel like you've been able to do that and you can tap down, then you can drive one leg out at a time and one leg out at a time, and notice what you feel there. Okay. Once you feel like you've mastered that and you can drive the leg out, then add the arms, because the arms throw everybody off. Trust me, I will watch people, I'm like, they're going like this and they're flailing their arms. So master your legs first, and then we can add the arms for more movement patterns. So you're going to drive the left leg with that right arm out, and then drive it back in. And then same thing, left hand with that right leg out. So move with control. You want to move through this very slowly, because when you slow down, you pay attention to the muscles that are working, you can then start to really create that function and strength within the body, versus trying to just get through the movement. That's not going to do your body any good. All right. So that's exercise number 1, is the dead bug. So you choose a level, start with level 1, those knee drives, then the heel taps, and then drive the legs out. And then when you're ready and your brain can figure out the arms and the legs, then you add in the arms and the legs. Okay. So then our next exercise is going to be a glute bridge with a ball squeeze. And so again, with the ball squeeze, we're adding those adductors into it, but we're also aiding in that internal rotation, because when we add adductors, we promote more internal rotation. So a regular glute bridge is great, or can be, but really focusing on those adductors, those lower abs, and the glutes. So the closer your feet are to your bum, the more you're going to get glute activation. Whereas the further out there, you're going to get more hamstrings. Hamstrings do play a role in bulletproofing the pelvis, but in today's video, we were going to work on those glutes. And I want you to think a nice tripod foot, meaning your big toe, outer edge, and the heel of the foot stays nice and firm in the mat, right? So you want to think you have those 3 contact points with the mat. So if you want to do this barefoot, please do it barefoot. I love barefoot training. Okay. So you're going to inhale here. So same thing with our abdominal exercise is you want to make sure that your ribs are stacked, right? I don't want to be here and drive up, because see how that puts all that pressure up here and I'm dumping into my low back. It does not feel good. So you want to make sure that you're nice and stacked, and it's almost like you're peeling up off the ground, right? So I drop down, I inhale here, exhale. As I exhale, I'm going to squeeze the ball and drive up. So ribs should be nice and flat, lower abdomen should be nice and flat, and then you drop down. So you want to make sure that you're moving again with control, because you inhale here, and then exhale, squeeze the ball and lift up and drive through the feet to get those glutes on board. And then of course, drop down. So that's exercise number 2. And exercise number 3, we're going to use the yoga block. This is a reverse clamshell, which I love. Clamshells themselves can actually promote more external rotation, which in turn can actually open up the front of the pelvic floor, but then it also can clench and tuck in the back of the pelvic floor, and can continue to create more tightness in the posterior pelvic floor, which we don't want. Clamshells aren't never ever do them, but there's so many people that do them wrong and activate the wrong muscles. So I take caution when doing clamshells. Okay. So instead we're going to do a reverse clamshell. So you can use something support for your head, or you can simply hold your elbow or your arm underneath. I notice that I do have a gap between my body and the mat. And I want to think, I'm going to press my top knee into the yoga block. Okay. And you could play around with the positioning of the yoga block and where you place your knees. So you can have them out here, you can have them out at a diagonal, or you can have them out here. Everybody's body is different. So just feel and play around with it. Experiment with your own body. All right. So I'm going to think about pressing my knee into the yoga block. I want to get those adductors to turn on. Okay. I'm going to get those adductors to turn on, and then I'm going to get that glute to turn on. Once I have that, then I'm going to drive up and then drop down and repeat. So inhale here, exhale, press into the yoga block, get those adductors and drive up, and then repeat. So you should feel those glute activating, but what you should also feel is almost like an opening in the back, because that back pelvic floor, and that, like I said, that internal rotation is naturally going to lift the pelvis. So we're getting those adductors, we're getting internal rotation, and we're getting glutes to turn on here, which is going to be so good for your pelvic floor. So again, you're going to press into the yoga block. Inhale here, exhale, drive, and then drop. Now, once you feel like you have mastered that and you're like, okay, my glutes are turning on, my adductors are turning on, I really love this movement, you can add a rubber glute band around the feet to add some resistance, or you can even add an ankle weight to add some resistance as well. But again, same thing with any other move. You want to make sure that you move slow and you can feel the muscles you're supposed to be feeling. If you're feeling like a pinching or like any SI joint pain, back off. We should not be feeling that, and we need to slow down and just reset our bodies. All right. So our final movement is an adductor slide. I absolutely love these. I just programmed them into our monthly training plan today. So you'll want some cushion for the knee that is going to be coming tall. So we're going to do this in a tall kneeling position. Then once you're ready, you can come into a standing position, which I'm not going to show you today because I want you to start here. All right, so you're going to come into that tall kneeling position and you're going to drag the knee out and only go as far out as it feels good. Then you want to think about gently pressing the knee in and dragging in towards the midline. So you're going to feel adductor a little bit on this leg that's helping you to stay stabilized, but it's mostly going to come from the leg that's going out. So don't be afraid to take your hands and feel for it. So you're going to drive out and then push into the towel and drag in. So you should really feel those adductors turn on. All right, so drag out and then exhale to come in. Why I love this exercise is because we don't train our adductors enough. And like I said, the adductors literally pull on the pelvis. So as you pull on the pelvis, it aids in that internal rotation and it literally helps to lift the pelvic floor. And so this is why I love training the adductors and why adductors are a massive part of my plans when helping women restore prolapse, leaking, and diastasis recti. So anyway, I recommend that you give those a try, experiment with your body, feel what you feel, swap them out for Kegels. Unless, like I said, if your pelvic floor PT told you to do Kegels, by all means, be respectful and listen to your PT, but ask questions. Don't be afraid to be an advocate for yourself and ask questions. If you are ready to dive deeper into a pre-programmed plan specific to restoring prolapse and leaking and diastasis recti at home, make sure you check out the All Access membership. You can get access to my Core Revive program, which is my 4-week corrective exercise rehab program. And then you can also get access to my Core Lift Method program, which is meant for moms that are ready to start lifting, but they want to do it with a mashup of lifting weights, intensity, and corrective exercise. So make sure you check out the All Access membership, 3 tiers that you can choose from. And if you have any questions, don't be afraid to reach out to me, and I'll see you in the next video.